right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Destination Dissertation, and I'm here with the with is it future or current doctoral future doctor Tracy Pearson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you? I technically do have a doctorate. I have a Juris Doctor, but we don't call each other doctors for some reason in the legal profession. So we just sort of cast that one aside.
And this is going to be a great conversation because I have only met one other person that's actually has the Juris Doctorate and is also pursuing an educational doctorate, which is unique, a very small group of people ever. So she is already a doctor, but she is currently pursuing more. So without any further ado, can you tell us a little bit about your story? You know, where you were educated and kind of your journey in learning.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Londonderry, New Hampshire. So I'm a Los Angeles transplant. I live in LA. I went to public school. I graduated from high school in 3 years, and I went off to college. And I decided, I initially decided I wanted to be a high school English teacher, and I did about a semester internship, which they have you do ahead of time, and decided I didn't really want to do that. Like high school was not the environment for me. I became a McNair Fellow, or I think they call them scholars now. But it's a federal fellowship for students who are in underrepresented categories, low income, or minorities. And it was created out of, unfortunately, the Challenger accident. And it was named after a man named Ronald McNair. And so the idea was to help students in those categories, in those areas, those identity categories, move on to graduate school, to be able to have the ability to explore graduate school. And so I started to think about the idea of teaching in college. I ultimately did that for a little over 15 years, but while I was in the middle of that journey, I switched to law school. And that was sort of where I found my niche. I really enjoyed problem solving. And I spent about 15 years practicing as a lawyer and as being a mediator and doing investigations, both privately and for the court system. And then it was about in 2015, I decided to sort of shift, pivot, I think is the word we use now, and think about moving outside the legal system. So I was looking for positions within investigations, and I landed at USC. At that point, I was looking to try to, we have a wonderful benefit. So I was looking to try to expand my knowledge, and we have a great program. It's a doctorate in education. Problem much differently than the way it's been looked at before, but it's organizational change and leadership. And the way we look at it here at Rossier is, how do you get people to do what you need them to do? So how do you teach them to engage in organizational change in a way that has sustainable impact? How do you teach people to become better leaders? Whereas in other schools, let's say in business schools, that is not the focus. Education is not the focus. So it really gets to the heart of the problem. And so that's how I ended up where I am and in pursuing this second doctorate.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I don't think I've knowingly met anyone that finished high school in 3 years, and so that's a feat within itself. But just loving how you're been able throughout your career to change and say this is next. A lot of people I see are focused, kind of locked in. So next question is, any particular reason that you decided on USC?
Well, I was okay. So I was here, but one of the interesting things that happened was that I had my job at USC is I'm a senior investigator in the Office of Conduct, Accountability, and Professionalism. So what that means is that I investigate the misconduct of faculty and staff, and so, or alleged misconduct of faculty and staff. And so what my role is to do a lot of interviewing of faculty and staff, you know, people who have been alleged to have done something, and people who are reporters, people who are witnesses. So I got to know faculty, and one of the things that I fell in love with at USC were the faculty. One of the first interviews I did was with a faculty member who, the first thing they said to me was, tell me about yourself and how did you come to USC? I had never done an interview in my life where somebody wanted to know something about me. And that was something that was very commonplace when I would talk to faculty, whether it be in interviews or even just, hi, you know, I'm running into you across campus. They truly do care about you. And that is especially true at Rossier. And so when it came to trying to think about, gee, do I go back into school? It was definitely the faculty experience was something that was really inspiring.
Oh, that's awesome. I never thought about that, but there is a unique feel. There is definitely a unique feel at Rossier towards that. So that was beautiful. Now, as far as your dissertation focus, have you selected what area, you know, what you can share, or are you still wide open?
Oh no, I'm locked in. I'm ready. I am very lucky to have as my dissertation chair Dr. Kathy Kropp, who is someone who has spent a long time previously working at Rand Corporation and has done large-scale studies. So she's really, first of all, she's really kind, and she's really, she cares about you as a person. Never mind you as the doctoral student, but you as a human being. So she's been wonderful, and she's helped me really hone the idea. I had an idea when I came in, but it took my diversity class and my leadership class, and then finally working with Dr. Kropp to sort of hone it. So the basic problem of practice that I'm focused on is implicit bias in workplaces, workplace investigations. And to expand on that a bit, you know, most organizations have policies that are driven by equity. If you look at USC, we have an equity-driven mission statement. If you look at Rossier, we're all about equity. If you look at all of our policies having to do with misconduct, we're about equity. However, we look at things from a neutral standpoint. Neutrality is huge in the investigation field. I'm a neutral investigator. That's the biggest thing that we say. We say it in our reports after a neutral investigation. The fact is that neutral investigations are a fallacy. They're socially constructed concepts that make us feel better. Neutrality doesn't exist. And a good example of that would be if you look at teachers. There have been a lot of studies that have been done about teachers who are good-hearted. It's a warm environment. They want to help, which is, if you contrast that with an investigation, it's a conflict-driven environment. Two people are opposing each other. They're making a complaint. There's stress. Completely different environment, right? So in a warm, happy, helping environment, teachers engage in implicit bias all the time. There's been studies that have been done where you know, they've asked teachers to watch videos of students and to pick out which students are going to be the problem students. And what they found was that the teachers picked out the African American students more often than any other student. So we know that implicit bias exists in just that environment. Well, implicit bias exists everywhere. And one of the things that we do not do, and I'm not speaking specifically about USC, but as investigators, we don't think about implicit bias. It was only a few years ago that mediators started to think about how implicit bias impacted the way that they worked in a mediation. You know, what were they thinking about this person? What types of questions were they asking? And so my project is specifically focused on the PMO theoretical framework, where I am trying to understand, what do investigators know about implicit bias? How do they see it, if they see it? working in their investigations? Does it come out in their questioning? Does it come out in their choice of witness? Does it come out in the way they write their reports, despite the fact that it says this was a neutral investigation? I want to understand what their motivations are for doing the work. Internal investigators can take a number of different forms. They all aren't attorneys. We have, at USC, we have some that are attorneys. We have some that are former law enforcement. We have some that are neither. And human resources people do investigations, and their training is in human resources management. So they're all coming to doing this work differently. And I want to understand what their motivation is behind why they do it. You know, I can make some assumptions, like lawyers do it because we're fact finders. We want to understand what the truth is. You know, law enforcement wants to get the bad guy. You know, these are some ideas. Obviously, it's not universal. It's not every person. But I also want to know what the organizational barriers are that exist that reinforce implicit bias, and that are preventing us from being able to do investigations that people can believe in. One of the biggest problems that we have is having people come forward, and it's because they don't trust the process. And I don't blame them; they shouldn't. The process is flawed. The fact that, and here are some good examples. Typically, you know, implicit bias might play its way out this way. You might interview a middle-aged, overweight woman, and you might think she is a lazy whiner, because maybe that's what your brain is programmed to think, because of the way that we program people in society. It starts with cartoons, it moves to commercials, and it goes all the way through our work, our experiences. And so an African-American man comes in and he's angry. He's angry, he's been accused. And why wouldn't he be? Well, but he gets accused of being angry as if that's wrong. Whereas, let's say a white executive is angry and we don't blame him for that. You also, you know, you might have, you know, there are a lot of other examples of those sorts of ways it plays itself out. You might have somebody who cries in an interview, and you might, you know, think that they are an emotional basket case. Well, it may in fact be that they have a disability. And so you are not aware of that, and so you are applying your judgment about what's appropriate and not appropriate to do during a conversation, which is a bias. And when there are very good reasons for why somebody might be crying during the course of a conversation. So that's what my focus is on, and what I hope to accomplish in my tiny little slice that I get to do as part of my dissertation. I can't solve all the world's problems. I just only solve one.
Wow, that's really great insight. Recently, for my, I think I have a class on power, equity, and diversity. We took the Harvard, there's an implicit bias test created by some researchers at Harvard. Do you have any, are you currently working on, or do you have any instrument tools where people can assess implicit bias, or you would recommend to different fields that whoever watches this video?
The Harvard one is good. There's a lot of them out there. You're going to want to look at the reliability scores and the validity scores on those in order to really pick good ones. You know, because there is a lot of junk out there, for lack of a better term. I have yet to decide whether I'm going to develop my own, or whether I'm going to use some already created standardized ones. You know, I always like to try to do something new. I want to try to, you know, refine what's been done before. So I haven't yet decided what I'm going to do, but the Harvard one is a good one. But for those that are watching, you really do want to pay attention to those validity scores and reliability scores that you might see in studies, so that you can make sure that the instruments that are being used are really effective and have been tested and retested and are reliable.
Wow. And I want to also, just in conversing with you, I don't think I've quite ever seen the connection between how you laid it out, between getting your JD and your doctorate in organizational change and leadership. I really see the tie-in, and I have a niece who recently she was recently at Yale, and she wanted to get her JD and get her MBA, I believe, and I told her she couldn't. And so, because of talking to you, I'm going to apologize to her. I think she's now at the University of Indiana in law school, but I want to make sure I apologize to her, because not only can she, but she can actually create a lot of change the same way you're doing it. This is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think it's possible to do that. I think that you should have a really clear plan about what you want to do. But the other thing is that your plans can change. The way I see the work that I'm doing, my goal is to impact the way that we're changing, or impact the way that we're doing investigations, because we do them badly. And generally, we just do them badly. And I'm probably the only investigator that's willing to stand up and say that. I want people to come forward and trust the system. You've seen the Me Too movement. People are coming forward, but the system is still failing them. It takes a lot of combined power of vulnerable people to force a change like that. And the problem with the system is that it reinforces power with people who have power, and it continues to oppress people who are vulnerable, given the fact that we have to treat everybody equally. So if you already have power, you're going to continue to keep it. And if you don't have any power, you're going to continue to not have any power. And so what I want to do is I want to change the way we handle investigations. And that includes the way we process them, the way that we write about them. I think that, it might be plausible to expect that what we're going to do is explain how we mitigated for implicit bias in our reports, that we get ahead of it. I think that the other thing is that to recognize is that everything starts with academics. In the legal system, we have mediation, and that's standard now. But before, it used to be this newfangled thing, and it came out of academics. And so similarly, I think that where I would like to see this work go is changing the legal system, because in the legal system, people are making judgments too. You have a jury of 12 people who have implicit bias. You have a judge who does a bench trial who has implicit bias. And how do you account for that? Because they consider themselves neutral too. And so particularly when it comes to workplace investigations and workplace problems, people suffer in workplaces. People leave because of not because of jobs, but because of the way they were treated. And you're at work most of the time, unless you're asleep. That's sort of where we are in our society. And I want the legal profession to start looking at these employment problems a little bit differently, because it changes the way that you evaluate a case. It changes the way that you evaluate facts, and it explains the whys and the hows, which are often difficult to do, and it gets us outside some of the boxes that have been created that exist, that may have been less successful for people who are in vulnerable populations, as opposed to the people who are more powerful. Management's powerful. It works in their favor. The workers, it's not. It doesn't work in their favor. And no matter what you say. And so I think that's what I want to see my work do. I want to challenge the status quo and get people thinking differently.
Wow, that's awesome. I had to write something down. You said, I just want to make sure I wrote it down. You say you want to change the way people evaluate, definitely like investigations and things of that nature, so they can truly evaluate. Did you say the why and the how?
Yeah, the whys and hows of why people do what they do. One of the things as lawyers, we have to figure out what was the motivation behind why the employer did what it did. to that employee. Let's say you have an employee who has a termination and they go to court, or they're alleging discrimination. And you have to figure out, why did that happen that way? What was the reason for why they made that employment decision? Usually the court is looking at business judgment as a concept, which is that the business can have, its judgment, even though it's bad. And if it's a defense, it is business judgment. But if that business judgment is based on implicit bias, if it's based on a belief system about stereotypes, and you can think about it just a little bit differently, and find ways to prove it, then now you're back in business. Now, for lack of a better term, you're back in the game, and you're able to say, well, wait a minute, no, that manager, it may be relying on business judgment, but in fact, what they had was an implicit bias against this person because of. When we talk about employment discrimination cases, we don't talk about implicit bias. We always talk about bias, direct bias. So that person doesn't like, let's say, African American people, okay? And you got to find a way of proving that. Well, but if we can talk about it in terms of implicit bias, which is that's already baked in, okay? The way that people get treated is already baked in because, you saw the cartoons as a kid and then the commercials reinforced it. Let's think about another good one that I like to talk about is overweight people. Overweight people are made fun of. They lose jobs. They don't get recognized as humans, or they don't get jobs. They treated different in the workplace. And so you learn that stuff young when you're a kid in commercials. You learn it then, or in cartoons. It's reinforced in commercials. And then, you live your life, with sitcoms, reinforcing it, right? So now you're in the workplace and you're trying to hire somebody, or you're trying to be hired, and you're overweight. You already have a fight on your hands to get that job, because implicitly people think, what do they think of? They think of people who are overweight as being lazy, that they can't control themselves, they're not disciplined, they're not organized, they lack motivation, you name it, you got it. And so those are already ideas in their head, and they're not saying it, they're not even aware of it because it's implicit. And so when they're looking at those resumes, if there are 3 people who have similar qualifications and then who could have all equally been great people, they might very well go with the one who is not overweight. And if you're a woman and you're overweight, now the identity categories start adding up on you, and you start having, we have an intersectionality problem because we have an overweight person who's a woman who's also African American. Good luck. And so if we don't figure out how to teach people about implicit bias, and if we don't figure out a way to teach organizations about how to understand it, spot it, avoid it, and have policies against it, and enforce them through investigations that also don't do those things, we're never going to fix the problems that we have in society. That's why we continue to have the problems that we have. That's one of the reasons. Direct bias is really sort of an easy thing. It's the implicit stuff that's the problem. And it's so insidious. It finds its way into things in ways that are just unconscionable.
Well, I'm looking for an offering plate because you just preached a sermon, and this is why I was inspired to do Dissertation. I believe that you have conversations with people, and you put it on the most popular medium now, video, and you have these conversations, and what you just said, oh my gosh, I mean, it is just that right there. You just wrote a book. That is a book. So if you have books on your palette to write, please write that one, because you broke it down into understandable language where everyone can understand. So gosh, kudos to you, man.
That means a lot that I was able to simply explain that, because they really are simple concepts. But it takes putting them together and getting people to understand the examples. So that means a lot. Thank you.
Yes, and just how you then use the intersectionality. This is all good. So this is not endorsed by USC, but you make me proud to be a Trojan, and what you're doing. So I have to ask, do you have a website? Because people are going to watch this, and if I'm a superintendent or I own a organization, I'm a CEO of an organization, I'm going to want you to come out. Do you have a website or any information people can get in contact with you in the future?
You bet. I'm working on a website. I have a LinkedIn profile that you can get to, so you can get to it through Tracy Pearson. My email is there. But you can also email me at Tracy, Tracy, at changeandimpact.com.
Awesome. Well, those you guys who have got a chance to listen to this was just a timely message. It's currently, full disclosure, it's March 17th. And so we're within the early parts of what we're experiencing now and around the nation and world with the COVID issue. So this is what distance learning looks like. This is what collaboration looks like. We've got a lot done today. And so we're utilizing it. Just have to ask, how are you, your family? Is everyone okay?
Yes, I am. I'm very lucky. My partner, my husband, he works for a law firm that is allowing him to work from home. I'm home working. And when it comes to using technology, my program is completely 100% online. So we have not been impacted. And it's just another day, that ends in Y for us when it comes to using this sort of technology. And so I understand the rest of the world is trying to sort of adapt and get up to speed. But one of the things that I've said is that online education isn't the future, it's now. And I think we're seeing that. So.
It truly is. Well, thank you so much for making time. I'll talk to you offline, but thank you so much. This is Destination Dissertation. This is the current doctor and future Dr. Pearson. We thank you for visiting with us and having this conversation.
Thank you. You too. Take care.